I think that a big part of creating your own epic freelance life is to make sure that it's actually your epic freelance life and not someone else's.
If we aren't living our lives intentionally like that, then you basically said it. Our lives begin to live us.
So I put in my calendar and I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew I had to. And suddenly the year started changing form.
What you're describing is exactly how I moved to New York. I didn't get ready first and then move to New York. I bought a plane ticket 6 months out and then forced myself to figure it out.
This is Philip Van Nostrand, and you are listening to the Epic Freelance Life podcast. How to make more money and live an epic freelance life.
All right, welcome back. This is Phil Van Nostrand. I'm here with the Epic Freelance Life podcast, and I am talking to Marianne Cantwell. Marianne, hello.
Hey, Phil. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay, me too. You and I started our independent kind of entrepreneurial journeys around the same time, which we might get to. We definitely should talk about. But why don't you introduce yourself first and tell us who you are and what you're about?
So I'm Marianne Cantwell, and I'm usually known as the author of Be a Free Range Human, which is all about creating and you're growing your own thing in a way that really fits you and your personality and your life. But over the years, as we all do when we have epic freelance lives, I've really evolved what I've done. So I've done things like I have run courses for thousands of people on everything from growing your thing in a way that fits you to finding and using your superpowers in what you do. I gave a TEDx talk called The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In. That's been viewed, I think, like 500,000 times, and loads of other things.
Yes.
But I'm basically all about doing your own thing in a way that fits who you are and what you want, which I think is where we align, Phil.
I love that. Yeah, exactly where we align. I say living life on your own terms. Are you, do you consider yourself primarily someone like an online kind of person? Would you include, because you didn't include that in the definition of who you are and what you do, but I feel like a lot of where you live and exist is sort of in the online world.
It's so funny. It's like a fish doesn't notice it lives in water, right? Like I have worked exclusively online for over a decade. So that's a huge yes.
Okay, cool. Yes. Got it.
Totally
I
forgot
love that.
that
Yeah,
one.
I think you are like truly a master online marketer and entrepreneur, and it's cool to kind of have followed your journey over the years. And where are you currently speaking to me from?
I am sitting in LA where I live with my fiance, looking out over a tree that currently has a squirrel looking back at me. So I'm in the middle of the woods, but actually in LA. Little juxtaposition there.
That's right. You're sort of in the heart of LA, but a lot of people don't know that LA is kind of very hilly in some parts and lots of cool outdoor stuff, right?
Yes.
I love that. So I just want to say briefly that I met you because I was hosting Couch Surfers a long time ago in Santa Barbara, and you were one of my first and favorite couch surfers over 10 years ago, right? And I don't think you had written your book yet, so you were just sort of like living your best life on the road, basically. Is that correct?
I did couch surfing twice, and one of them was with you, and I never did it again. I mean, you weren't the
Yeah.
last one. The next one was the last one. Trust me.
Okay,
Yours was
got
awesome. And I was actually, so I had just started my business, actually several different businesses. And this was my first, what I now call sort of more location independent, free range type of trip. And I had never really done that before, but I basically packed my stuff up and I decided to travel for 3 months and see. And people weren't doing that back then. I wanted to see if I could make that thing work. And one of my first stops happened to be in Santa Barbara, where you were living at the time. And I feel like we just grew up
Yeah.
together in terms of our businesses from there.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And you, I think then were sort of, after that, you had spent a lot of time in Bali and Australia,
Yes.
and then back in London for a while. But now, full circle, you're living in California, just a couple hours from where we first met. And I am in New York City. So
Amazing.
that's
We
cool.
swapped right over. Yes.
Yeah. So I, you know, I think you, and I've read your book too, Be a Free and Human. It honestly is, it was super inspiring to me, and exactly like you said, we overlap in so many ways with what we believe and how we want to live in the world. Um, and you said something to me very interestingly before we started recording, which is that you don't necessarily consider yourself a freelancer. And you said that your book wasn't necessarily geared towards freelancers. So who is your book for?
Mhm. Well, the book is only one small thing of what I do. It's just kind of what I'm known for. But if you
Sure.
specifically on the book, it's for that book is for people who want to be doing something different with their lives, and they think that that thing might involve not having to have a job again. In other words, getting to do
Got
things
it.
on their own terms, as their own boss, whether that involves what I call freelancing, which is going into companies and freelancing, or what I call free
Sure.
ranging, which is going and doing your own thing, sort of as your own boss in a different way. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I think even with the other stuff that I do, that's more about like growing your thing and really showing up as you in what you're doing to get better results. It's not really about, in a way, what you do. It's about the philosophy behind how you do it. I think that's what I'm most
Yes.
about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, like, is that kind of what you are most excited about these days?
Absolutely, yes. I think that when I started out, and I think the first thing is, wherever your listeners are in their own journey, we all evolve what we do and where what we care about. And I think one of the joys of free ranging, or whatever we want to call it, is you
Hmm.
get to redefine your job description whenever you need to. You know, when I started out, I mean, I didn't start out teaching people how to quit their jobs and start a business. I'd done other stuff. But when I started doing that, my thing was I was so excited about the idea of, gosh, you'll be able to live and work anywhere. And people weren't talking about that. So it was fresh and
Yeah.
new and super creative. And so I was excited there. Over the years, there's some amazing resources out there for people who want it. And I didn't feel like I wanted to live in that space anymore. So I evolved what I
Uh-huh.
did to focus on the other half of what we've done, which is doing what you do in a way that fits who you are. So your personality as well as the life you want. And so
Yeah.
it's really evolved over the
That's
years,
so
which is
important.
great, right?
Yeah.
Your stuff's evolved so much as well, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I agree with you. Like I every time I do talks or I don't know, online presentations or mentorship or even coaching, I'm always like very cognizant that Phil's approach, which is kind of highly ADD and also extremely extroverted, is
Mhm.
not for everybody. And I wouldn't expect everybody to do the amount of like networking that I do,
Mhm.
which has been my secret to success. But like,
Yes.
but other, I have many introverted friends and people who are quieter online and stuff. And so I think what you're saying is so spot on, that our personality, we have to be able to match our personalities to what we do day to day. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
I think what happens to a lot of people is that they feel a lot of shame because they're not doing enough, or they're not doing what they feel like they think they should be doing, because lots of voices out there are saying stuff like, you got to be on TikTok or you got to do your reels or whatever. and
Mm.
and and it makes people feel like they're falling short somehow because someone else has had success in that, right? But they're not taking into consideration their own personality and what suits them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's just an extension of that. You know, you talk about living an epic
Yeah.
freelance life, and I think a really big part of that is saying, hey, if you want to live in whatever an epic life means to you, and you
Hmm.
have a business to run or your own thing to run, then you also need to know, hey, where do I put my attention to get the best results in a way that's also going to feel good to me? And if you don't know that, then
Yeah.
we can listen to as many podcasts as we want, make as many to-do lists as we want, and yet we are still living the same life and doing the same things every day because we need to have our business side work. So for me, that thing of do things in line with who you are and find your superpowers, it sounds all nice and fluffy and, this is all
Mhm.
rainbows and happy kittens, which it kind of is. But more importantly, the reason I got into it was I realized, having worked with literally thousands of people over the years, that the people who got to actually live the epic life, not just while living on credit, not just while living off savings, but sustainably
Mm.
and practically for years, they
Yes.
also had this overlay, like they knew if I want to get great results, there's this way, like Phil knows his thing is around, one of your things is connection, how you connect with
Mm-hmm.
people. So the time you put into that overall ends up paying off. For someone
Yeah.
else, it might be something different. And when we know that, we can stop doing 1,000 things and we can pick like the 5 or 6 things to write for us, and we
Mm,
can get better results. And also, if you want to pivot, you then know how to do it. Does that make sense?
absolutely. And I want to know, Marianne, for you, what is your superpower, do you think?
So I don't believe that any of us just have one superpower.
Sure.
I think
Okay, what are
we're
your
a lot more
superpowers?
complex. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just to give you a context, the way I talk about superpowers is that we all have a couple of them. They are not the things you
Mm-hmm.
probably think of when people say what's your superpower. They're the things that are so natural to you that you sometimes don't
Yeah,
notice them because you can't help but do them. Right. And the power of
exactly.
them is in how they intersect with each other. So one of my superpowers is what I call attraction. And so I know that if I want to have anything grow, if I want to do things with more ease, I'm always asking, am I doing things in a way where I'm allowing myself to attract people into this? Another one of
Mm,
them that intersects with that is empathy. So my attraction isn't just standing on top of a hill and like being like, come on in. It's actually a very gentle version of attraction where people hear me talk and
yeah.
they go, I see some of myself here. I feel heard and seen. And so those,
Mm,
here's a practical way, if I'm marketing, I'm not going to spend
mm-hmm.
days going down another style of doing things. I'm going to say, how do I attract with empathy, with enthusiasm, and other superpowers? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I want attraction as my superpower. It sounds so great.
I think, oh my gosh,
I
you
really
that
love
is like
that.
literally the intro to a course. And that's the funny thing about superpowers is that we all think someone else's sounds great, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like I would wish I had your energy and could network like you do, but I
Oh my
know that when
gosh.
I do it, I don't get great results and I'm drained, and I'd be better
Yeah,
off doing
yeah, yeah.
something else. I love watching
I
you do it
totally
though.
understand.
So
I'm glad I can entertain you from afar.
please do
Um,
continue.
so one thing that I think is interesting about people who are living sort of their epic freelance lives, or as you say, epic free range lives, is that they have sort of built in habits about their life that ensures that their life is staying interesting or fresh. Like I every single year since 2003, actually, I've gone to a new country every year for my entire life. And so that's ensured that at the bare minimum, I will be traveling somewhere new in the world and adding a stamp to my passport. And I love that. And I still love that. Even in 2020, it happened. And so I wonder for you if you have any of these sort of routines or habits or built in uh, motivators in your life to kind of ensure that you are living an epic free range life.
Hmm. So I think a little bit of both. So one of them is I actually think that some people's personalities are really well geared towards habits, and yours is one of them. I've
Yeah.
known you for years, and you're geared towards it. Mine is not. So
Okay.
how anyone who's listening, and I'm going to like do the thing here where I'm imagining myself listening to a podcast like this. And I used to listen to all the same podcasts and stuff you did, right? And
Uh-huh.
we'd talk about it and I'd read the books
Yep.
and I'd be fascinated with people who had these habits. It took me years to realize that there are a lot of people, possibly someone listening in now, who are fascinated
Ooh.
with the ideas of it, but don't have that tendency. So I'm going to talk about how I, as someone without that tendency, does things. So one of them
Okay,
is instead
great.
of totally different, right? So you'll see
Yeah.
under the hood here.
I'm
So
happy about this a lot.
I love the way you do it, by the way. Do you know, I'm just going to add something for people who don't know you. I don't know if you
Oh,
still do this, but for years, you used to, how was it, voicemail or call everyone you knew whose birthday was that day? Do you still do that
oh
one?
yeah, I still do that.
Was
I
that you?
called someone yesterday on
Oh
their
my
birthday.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that.
Every I
You also used to change
Yes,
your
if you are
voicemail every
someone.
day, didn't you?
Oh my
Is that
gosh,
another
that's a different story. But yes, one, if you are somebody that I love and
one?
that I really care about, I put your birthday in my calendar on repeat and I try to call you on your
Oh,
birthday. And I had two friends whose birthdays were on Wednesday, one person on Monday, and I called them and it was great.
you're
Well, one of the guys
amazing.
cried when I called him. um, And two, my schedule used to be so busy that I used to actually change my voicemail every single day because people would start. I mean, this is back when people actually called each other. So back when like early cell phone days, people, my sister and people would complain that they'd always call me, but they'd always get my voicemail. So it felt like I was always ignoring them. And I was like, I wish I had a secretary who could just be like, "Oh, Phil's in a meeting right now. He'll be free in an hour." And then in my head, I was like, "Oh, I could be my own secretary." And so at the beginning of every day, I would list out my schedule so people would know that I'm not ignoring them. I just was busy, and I would be, if they listened closely, they'd know I'd be free between like 5 and 7 p.m. or something. And so
Oh, I
that
love.
was
See,
fun.
you've done this for
Yeah.
years. Like you've done like
It's so
versions of your
ridiculous.
habits for so long. I
Yes,
love them.
But then there was a time when like I did that for almost like 3 weeks in a row, and no one called me because people just stopped calling, and I was like, "This is dumb. I'm doing this for myself." So I killed that. But
That's so
but tell
funny.
me, so if you don't have
Yes.
habits, how do you sort of ensure, or what are you doing? Do you think that's different for you
Yes, I have a
in making
series
your
of
life
things to talk
interesting?
about.
Okay,
Let
I'm
me
so
go through
excited
and
about
talk
this.
about them.
Yeah.
So one of them is if you're not a long-term habit person, then you can be a periodic habit person. So you can set
Mm.
yourself habits for periods. So the first thing that I do is I tend to work better in like 3-month increments. So I might have a 3-month increment where I take a certain number of days a week off. So now I'm not going, my head's not spinning out about, but what happens if this happens and that happens? I'm like, it's 3 months. So that works well for my brain.
I love that.
It also, yeah, so that example is great also because I'm also someone who, when I get into a project, I am in that project. It's my life and my world.
Yes,
And
I know
we
that.
know this.
Yeah.
I don't talk to humans for a period when I'm in a project.
Uh-huh.
And I know that. So now we all are aware of that. I'm a really big
Yep.
fan of being realistic about who you are. And so I'm like, let's be realistic. If I'm writing a book or doing something, I'm out for a period. Am I going to have the same principles as I do in a normal time? No, I'm not. But that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a period. So I say give yourself permission, but you have to know what your thing is for these 3-month periods. So that's
Yeah.
one of them is to
Are
do it
you in any sort
incrementally.
of period? Are you in any sort of period right now?
Yes, absolutely am. I'm kind of in a letting go of some stuff I had created and creating new things phase.
Okay.
So with that, one thing that's really important to me is that I'm having space most days to do a side project of creating art, not for my business, but because it keeps my
Mm-hmm.
creativity flowing. So that's one of my things. I'm also
Oh,
taking like a day
okay.
a week off. I'm not working weekends. So I've got a few
Lovely.
metrics and stuff in. So something else that I do if
Beautiful.
you're interested in like
Yeah,
non-organized people or less
absolutely.
organized people. So something I find really useful is asking myself some different creative questions to make sure that my business isn't running me, that I actually get to run my business. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, this is a big one. So, one of them is the question, what if this was easy? So, when I have
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite questions. So, if I have a
I
project
think it's a
coming up,
Tim Ferriss quote.
oh, is it? I thought
Did
I
you
made that one
have
up.
you heard that, or did you feel like you created that yourself?
I made that up years ago, I thought. Did I? Or
Because
did
I
he say
know
it
that
as
I've read
well?
that about Tim Ferriss when he was talking about starting his podcast and stuff. He's had that same exact words.
Gosh,
Yeah.
that is
It's
okay.
a
Well,
good
I
one.
also
No,
made it
no,
up
I love it.
separately. Like,
I say those exact words to people all the time. So I love that you're
seriously.
talking about this.
Do you know
So
it's
what if this
actually one of
was
my
easy and
biggest
oh yeah.
it's huge. Yeah, and then it's a creative
Yeah.
question. You end up coming up with like if I'm doing an online course launch, one of the questions I ask myself is what if this was easy? And then I can add in other
Yeah.
words like what if this felt spacious? What if this felt joyful? And sometimes when you're in business, I know your answer is don't be ridiculous. That's not how these things feel. I just have to get through it. That's how I feel sometimes anyway, right? Like you're like, that's silly. I just have to do this. But what asking yourself a question like that, what I find it does
Yeah.
is it forces me to find an answer. So what if this was easy? What if this didn't burn me out? What if this XYZ? It makes me go, huh.
Mm.
Like one of my answers once was, we're going to need more time to do this. Another one was, I'm going to need to have someone else on board to help me. Another one was, maybe I don't need to launch this on all the social channels. I just launch it in this one specific way. And every
Yeah.
time, suddenly it's like, if we don't think like this, we never have space to live the rest of our lives. And so that's one of my
Mm,
big tips is what if this was easy? And
so
there's so many
good.
other
It's
things. Like also, just last thing I'll say is just putting your
yeah,
lifestyle in as a key metric. So I also get that even if you're not going to plan out your whole year, you still want to know that you're going to take X amount of time, say, to travel if that's important to you. Where's that going?
yeah.
Where's that going to be? So questions like that and allowing them to be in there are so important. I know it's very
See,
basic,
that's
but
good. Honestly, that last part is like I feel like a different way of saying what I do too, because I think my concern, if I'm not, I mean, for me, it's traveling somewhere new every year. For you, it's making sure that you said that you have X amount of days free
Mhm.
for yourself each year. And I think both of us are kind of saying if we aren't living our lives intentionally like that, then you
Yes.
basically said it. Our lives begin to live us, right? And we lose.
Intentionally.
Oh,
That's my favorite word,
yeah.
intentionally.
I exactly. And I've had
Yeah.
friends. I mean, I have a friend in New York who I've shot for that he's an interior designer, and he once told me that he hadn't gone on a vacation in 5 years, and I was like, 5 years? You haven't left New York in 5 years, or you haven't moved somewhere, or been on an airplane abroad, which was wild to me. And so
Mm.
I think the caution there to anyone listening who works for themselves is that if you don't buy a plane ticket somewhere, or take that Friday off or whatever it is that you do, then there's always going to be work to do, and you're going to constantly be feeling like you're behind or needing to catch up on stuff or building things. We have to give
Mm.
ourselves that freedom.
And also, can I add to that a little? Which is, I
Yeah,
remember
please.
one time in my not early on, middling in my business when things had really taken off. It was turning over like a very healthy amount of money. And I
Mm.
really felt like I was in my flow with what I was doing. I was also really burnt out. This was years ago.
Mm.
And I remember asking myself, what do I want to achieve this year? And I was like, nothing. I want to
Yeah.
just not do, right? I was just like, I am
Yeah.
done. I am out. But, I had this thing, it had a life of its own. That's what I was doing. And so instead of coming up with this big epic growth plan, I just said, all I want is to take a month off. And I remember going, oh, that's impossible. You can't take a month off. And then I
Hmm.
was like, okay, so what if you took 3 months off? And see, sometimes I think if you increase the goal,
Oh yeah.
now we have to take it. So I was like, okay, you're taking 3. And I said, okay, can you do it tomorrow? And I was like, all these reasons, no. And I'm like, okay, you have to do it this year. When will you do it? So I put it in my calendar and I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew I had to. And suddenly the year started changing form. I had to
Oh
look at
yeah.
I basically was holding too much in my head of how I did things and I hadn't let anyone else in.
Hmm.
I didn't have any systems in place for like an assistant to take on even part. Like I just didn't, I had an assistant, but not high enough level at the time. So by the time
Sure.
I got to that date, I'd actually cleaned my business up. So sometimes if you're saying I can't do it, it's like, but what if you put it in the calendar and then you were like,
Yeah.
what would I do if I had to do it? It really
Exactly.
changes it because we always can. If you
I
got
mean,
ill for 3 months, like what would
absolutely.
happen? Like, right?
Yeah. If COVID hit, what would happen? Right. Like sometimes we
Yeah.
are forced into it. What you're describing is exactly how I moved to New York. And what I always tell people
Ooh.
is I didn't get ready first and then move to New York. I bought a plane ticket 6 months out and then forced myself to figure it out. Right. And that's it.
Yes.
Like if I had like taken the time or tried to like visit and like look at apartments or whatever, it just would have taken forever, and or like needed to build my portfolio a little bit more or something, and
Mm-hmm.
it never would have happened. And so I just bought the ticket, and then I figured out where to live. I figured out, what I needed to do before, and it allows you to also finish projects on time and stuff. So, yeah, I love that. I totally agree. So I want to know, Marianne, for you, I guess what are you you told me once actually that and I really like this and I think this is important for listeners to hear, is that you make money in kind of large chunks. Do you remember
Mm-hmm.
telling me this, that you don't make
Yes.
money like every week or kind of like smoothly throughout the year? It's sort of like you launch something big and you make a large chunk of change in, one launch, and that lasts you for 6 months or the year or something. Do you still do that? And do you want to describe that process a little better than I did?
I got to tell you, Phil, I've run every business model over the years.
Okay.
So I have, for people who don't know me in the past, I used to have consistent passive income. So I just want to clarify that. So I get what it's like to have that as well. So I've had both. I've had consistent passive income with, income coming in weekly from courses. I had a membership that was kind of a 6-figure membership that was doing really well. I had to show up once every 3 months. It ran itself. So I've done that model really well. And then I closed it down because I kind of personally wanted to move on from the type of product that, like the topics that were covered, and I wanted to create something different. So I shut them down. But what I've been doing lately has been a little different. And it's what you're talking about here, Phil, which is having lived the passive income model. It is fantastic. It also isn't everything. It's not. I think sometimes we think when we hear about passive income, it's
truly not passive. Yeah.
Well, mine kind of was. I've got to be honest, mine kind of was.
Oh, okay. Well, fine. You pulled it off. I feel like people have to keep feeding the machine though to keep that passive thing.
Oh, yeah.
Moving, right?
I think I'm lucky. I had a book and have a book that kind of feeds me clients, and then they get on my email list. And so it was let's put it this way. It was
Marianne actually figured it out, which is great.
Yeah. It was probably the equal amount of work over the course of a year as doing a couple of intensive launches in the year. So what I mean by that is making sure that the funnels at the time were working well, tweaking things to respond to what was going on. When I say it was pretty passive, it meant I could have disappeared I often disappeared for periods and it was still working. So yes, in that sense it was, but no, you didn't take your eye off the ball totally. The toddler was not running around the house 24/7 unattended, metaphorically speaking. You just had some time away from it. So yeah, so I had that and it worked well. But these days, and I would happily go back to that at some point. Right now, I feel like we all have different seasons in our business. And when you are going in a new direction, I don't think the best first step is passive income, because that's about replication of something that works. And I'm now in a phase where I am putting out new things like a new Superpowers Academy that I have just done, say, the Superpowers Academy is a program I've just done a test run for, and I'm going to then launch it bigger. In the future, that's a lovely example. I may go and make it passive once I see what works best about it. Once I have all my info. So now I'm in that phase. I'm like, it would make no sense for me to go and say, I'm going to make it passive and recurring when I don't feel like I've really, if you want to create something of quality, you have to get in there and mess with people a bit. Anyway, but so
yeah,
these
that's
days,
so smart.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I love your seasons of business theory. So I think that's really smart. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, these days, basically what I've done is I do a series of little launches over the year, and they can be an existing program. They can be like, I very rarely do this one, but like the other week I sent an email to my email list and said, hey, I'm opening up for these VIP half days. And I had a certain number of slots available and they just filled up. I was pretty clear what they were and people just bought it. So sometimes it will be interactive. I don't do that super often. Sometimes it's a course, sometimes it's something else. But what I do when I'm putting it out there is I always have a clear metric for how much do I want to bring in from this? What will that look like in terms of the numbers I need? And I sort of run it backwards. So I know in advance, I never put something out there. It's a guess. I know the numbers we're going to get. Like I know my following well enough. Yeah, I have this thing, you'll like this, Phil, where
I didn't know this about you.
I'll have a stretch metric and I'll say, hey, it'd be great if we get that number. We never get that number. We get the reasonable metric and we never get the lower one. Like I always have 3 and we always get number 2. So I'm like, I think my life lesson is raise it. But yes, that's how I roll. Make the number bigger. Oh my God. Learn it.
But and what does this, I mean, if you gave me real actual numbers, I would be thrilled, but you don't need to. I just want to know, like, how do you even come up with a number that you want to earn? Do you need a lot of money to survive? Are you trying to earn more money than you need? Do you save money?
Can I just talk about that phrase for a sec? Money to survive. I never use
Yes.
that phrase. Can
Yes.
we never use that phrase,
Okay.
Phil? And I'll tell you why I don't like
Fine.
using it. Not
Yeah.
to like police your language, but I'm gonna
Please.
tell you why I find it like I tell my clients to maybe watch themselves on it. Is that gives us
Good.
the impression that as freelancers or free rangers, all we can do is survive. Whereas, so if I was just making money to survive, I would be super, super stressed.
Yeah.
So I absolutely don't do that. No. So what I look at,
Good.
and it changes over the years, is and again, I work in different chunks. I'll say over, say, 6 months, what would
Mm-hmm.
feel really spacious to me? What would allow me to breathe? So I go more with that. What would allow me to breathe over this period? If I have a specific goal I'm working towards financially, then I'll set that and I'll say, what would that look like across, say, 4 different launches or something like that?
Sure.
So when I start, I
And
go either with a
oh
feeling
yeah,
or a specific thing every year. Say, and I'm in, yeah.
I love
Does
that.
that make sense?
And yeah, it does. But I want to know even kind of closer, like why would you want to earn a specific amount? Like how do you even come to a number?
For me,
Are
it's,
you like competitive with yourself, or is it the
yeah,
spacious thing or something else?
it's
Yeah.
both. So I have a thing that I'll never charge, like I'll never make an amount of money that after I've done it, I'll be like, dang, I should have gone for more. Right. Like that's one of my
Mm.
big things. So then everyone can do that, whether you've got individual clients or you're doing a bigger launch. So I learned over the years that I would be like, no, be totally okay with this amount. Then I'll do it. And I'll be like, oh my God, there was so much more work. Why didn't I make it like get more people or raise the price? So I've learned my
Yeah.
lesson. And so now I have minimums. So I would, here's an example. If I'm doing a test project, I would be very unlikely to run a test project for less than about 20,000 US ever. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would, and I do have a following, so I can pull that off. So that means even if
Mm-hmm.
I'm testing a new product, if I'm not going to make that much from a product test, I'm probably not going to test the product. Like I want to know
Interesting.
that I at least can bring that in. It's just a way of me getting a little bit more real with myself. I think I've broken
I
that
love
rule
that.
once for something I was interested in, and actually it wasn't something I continued with. So I've sort of learned it. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing different types of launches for established products, then I have different levels depending on how established the product is. So there's one product I won't launch if I can't personally make about 90 or 100,000 from it. And that means in
Okay.
terms of my energy. So I have to be honest. And I say, are my energy levels behind this? How well primed is my list? What's our support? What's our this? So that's like personal. That's like after splitting out costs. And, I always bring another
Yeah.
coach in after paying people off. So I just say every time I say, is this going to feel good for this
Mm.
amount? If it's not, no. And yeah, I just have, and by the way, for me, this works really well because I'm fairly spontaneous. So if I have a big idea of something I want to do, I always look at it
Yeah.
and I say, is that something that's really going to be worth my while? Because we then have opportunity cost. So that's my long answer. I hope it helps someone
This
in
is a
some
great
way.
answer. I think I'm gonna ask like a
Yeah.
selfish question now because
Yes.
I appreciate you giving real numbers here, and I want to
Mhm.
know like maybe I think I grew up with kind of like a poor mindset from my very frugal parents, and so it's like it's pretty wild for me to imagine launching someone and say like I'm gonna make over $100,000 off of this one thing, and
Mhm.
I wonder if you've always felt like you've deserved to earn that much money or if you grew into
Hmm.
it.
Interesting. That's a really meaningful question because I think that in a way it's a little bit of both. So in one way,
Mm.
I've never really had the thing of you shouldn't earn above a certain amount. I don't have that. I have
Mhm.
friends from all walks of life, and I don't particularly think any have made more worthy choices than the other. So I sort of see, like, I don't have a thing about you shouldn't earn above a certain amount at all. I think that you
Mhm.
shouldn't be. led to believe that you have to in order to be happy, I think you should make your own choices. But with that in
Of
mind,
course.
so I've never had a thing that I shouldn't do that. I think over the years, however, the online industry has changed and it has allowed people to have more awareness, especially when it comes to coaching online products and things like that around
Mm.
personal development and business. People have more awareness of the value. Therefore, finally, the prices have been able to match that. So now I still think we're a little under industry average for a lot of stuff, and I'm okay with
Oh,
that.
interesting.
Yeah, like if I'm being honest about it, like we're not, some people would think we're wildly over, but they're not really familiar with industry prices. Like I can see
Sure.
people either tend to say, oh my gosh, you're undercharging, or that's way too much. Like there's no real middle ground on
Yeah.
responses that I get. Like,
Got it.
so
That's
when
good.
you look at it that way, so I'm like, okay, so either you've no industry or not. So these days, and that's my other answer, is I've grown into the amounts a
Mm-hmm.
lot more. Like over these days, I mean, I didn't do one-to-one coaching for a long time. I really was all about, I
Mm-hmm.
started out like that. Then I ran groups. Then I have my coaches run groups. For someone to
Mm-hmm.
work with me privately now in any way, it's like a minimum 5-figure investment. And it's not even advertised. So if you'd asked me a few
Sure.
years ago whether I would do that, I'd be like, no, I could never charge that much. Now I'm like, I I can and I do, because I can be judicious and say
Mm.
no when it's not right for someone. So I know it's a roundabout way to answer your question, but I think one of the ways I've developed confidence in specific high prices has been that I am the first to say it's not for you when it's not. I'm the first to say this, if someone asks me, should I join this? I always actually get into a whole, like, tell me more about where you're at thing. And, half the
Yeah.
time I'll say no. And if you're willing to do that and you're genuinely grounded in that, then I think you can start to raise your rates in whatever you're
That's
doing. Does that
beautiful.
resonate with you?
It does make sense. Yeah. It means that you're willing to like turn down money because you don't just accept
Yeah.
everybody, and you're really giving people something that works for them, but they need to be prepared, right?
Absolutely. And, I
Yeah.
discourage people who joining, like, I don't obviously know everyone who joins my things, but if I find out
Mm-hmm.
that someone is in financial trouble and they're choosing to join one of my things, I actively dissuade them. I'm like, that's
Oh,
not the sort of product we have. I'm
yeah.
not someone who's going to say there might be products out there that are appropriate, but I don't recommend it. Stuff like that. But I'm not someone who's going to say join something and you'll make this amount of money in this period. I'm like, that's not what we're
Sure.
about. We're about like creating like lasting changes. So if this is like your last money or you're already in so much debt, I'd be like, I really am not going to encourage you to join this, because I don't want to be,
Mm.
from a PR perspective, I don't want that then to be bound up in that person's story that they may tell other people of being one of many who
Mm-hmm.
did something, this is why I don't have money because I spend all this money on this stuff. I don't want that
Oh,
story.
yeah. All
And
these
right.
education.
And
Yeah.
B,
Got it.
right. Like there's too many of those. I'd be like, nope, please don't put me in. And two, I would rather that person was able to breathe more. And you can't make big changes when you don't feel like you can breathe. So
Yeah, you're
anyway,
absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah.
When you have a
I know you
little,
think
yeah,
like
when you
that
have a
too.
nice,
Yeah.
I do. When you have a nest egg, you can afford to take like bigger risks in your career and changes and stuff. But yeah,
Hey,
otherwise
can I just
you're
add
just
one little
served.
one? Can I add one little thing,
Yeah,
Phil? If anyone
please.
is listening and is like, raising prices is like really tough, I'd say one of the things I'd say on it is just actually do it. Like try it.
Uh-huh.
Even if it means pulling price from your website for a period so you can do it in conversation or by message and just see what happens. And if it doesn't land right, then go and see what you can learn about how to position what you do better, because it's usually that. And the second
Yeah.
thing I'd say is if there's anything about, but what if they can't afford it? One of them is you can have a downsell offer for people who can't afford it. Possibly it's like a shorter series of whatever you're
Mm-hmm.
doing or less time. And if that's not an option or you don't want to do that, then something that I do is I have, whenever possible, I see who else I can refer them to. Not all the time, I don't always
Mm.
have that, but I had someone the other month say, I love your stuff, I really want to join this, but like, here's my financial position, is any way you can work with someone like me? And I just was like, I couldn't, because the headspace it would
Mm-hmm.
take up to help that person wasn't a one-off like 10-minute conversation. It was a lot of
Sure.
work. And I couldn't help them, but I was able to say, hey, here are 3 organizations I know that do this sort of work, and I'm pretty sure their prices are lower. So I can't really fully recommend. I don't know them that well, but I know they exist. So here they are. And they were really
Yeah, that's
grateful for
great.
that. So yeah, so Phil, you're not abandoning people, I think, is that you just don't have to
I
rescue
love them.
everyone. Yeah.
I literally had this same conversation today via Instagram. Like an old Santa
Oh.
Barbara friend is getting married, and they asked me if I knew anybody in San Francisco, and I was like, well, depending on the budget, like I might be able to do it for you. And they were definitely like below my budget. So I was like, let me find you someone. I know I have photo friends in that area. I'll try to
Oh.
find someone that like can recommend something. So it's the exact same thing. I didn't want to leave her hanging. Wanted to give her someone
Mhm.
solid, and it just wasn't going to be me, and that was okay.
Mhm.
I agree.
Love
Is
that.
what I'm saying.
Perfect.
um,
Perfect.
for for you, just a side like logistic note. I think to me it sounds. I interviewed Dory Clark too, and I felt
Mm.
like you and her have something very powerful and similar in together, which is that you both have a pretty solid mailing list. Is that correct? Would you
Mhm.
say that is
Yes.
like maybe I wouldn't call that your superpower, but it's definitely like a secret weapon that you have.
Oh, yeah, my business is based on my email list for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been growing that for a long time, right?
I gotta tell you, I'm not really growing it. I'm a little
Oh,
bit
okay.
lazy about these things. I
Got it.
have on my list of things to get to at some point to actually grow it. But no, I have been nurturing it for some. I mean, it does grow, but
Sure.
it's not like I'm like, hey, here's my tricks to like 10x your list overnight. I'm not that right person.
No.
But no, I have been nurturing a very loyal email list for a long time. And I mean, the first people I got on there, I got them. I was running these workshops for another organization back in London when I first started, and
Hmm.
no one knew who I was. I had no following. Um,
Yeah.
and I handed out a little piece of paper at the end, and people put their emails down. And the next
Oh
day, I
my
put them on my
gosh.
email list. Grew my
Yeah.
first few hundred people like that. And I sold my first, I was coaching, I sold my first group program like that. And over the years, it's grown through like whenever I know my TEDx talk goes a little viral, it does it every few months. It gets like an algorithm
Okay.
boost. And suddenly my email list will go up. And I'm like, oh, hey guys, guess you all saw that.
Nice.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so, there's lots of stuff. And it's for me, it's definitely my preferred communication style because I feel like everyone's in a little private room. And I mean, I'm sure we've had trolls, but I don't really see them because someone else filters my
Mm,
emails for me. Um,
nice.
it's not like the wild west of social media, but that way.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. But and so my question to you is like at what, and I'm sure the answer is smaller than we think, but like at what point do you think like a mailing list can have impact or bring you like decent business, you know? Is it
Hmm.
like a couple
It
hundred people,
depends.
like
Well,
5,000, 10,000?
it depends on a few things. One is, what's your price point? So if you're
Mhm.
trying to sell a $40 product, the answer is a lot bigger than you need it to be. You do
Oh,
not. That's not what that you need it a lot bigger than that. Even I wouldn't have a solid income if I was selling mostly $40 products. So I would never go
really?
down that route. Yeah, absolutely not. No way. Like your price
Interesting.
point's everything. I've only had a solid business because I make sure like one of my things is I make sure I create is of quality and therefore it's not low end, right? So
Got it.
my first question always is, hey, so what sort of product are you selling? So let's say you're selling a service or I don't know, whether it's photography, coaching, or something else, and you want individual
Yeah.
clients or groups. Okay, well, my next question is, what's your connection to the people on the list? Have you met them in person before? If they've seen
Mhm.
you in person, or they've seen you talk like on a webinar, or they've seen you be a guest on a podcast, they're a lot warmer. So if people go from listening to this and go and find my Friday love letters, which are basically
Mhm.
anywhere you can see that I have an email list, you get my Friday love letters from. So if someone listens to this and then goes there, they've already heard me talk and there's a connection. So if that's how people are getting their people on their email list and they've kept it warm with a good like welcome email, maybe a sequence, regular contact, and they're trying to get a certain like a small number of clients, you could be doing it with like 100 people. possibly
Okay.
fewer,
Interesting.
right? So
Yeah.
because your conversion rate decreases the bigger your list gets. So my open rate
Yeah.
and my conversion rate now is nothing like what it used to be. And because I don't know who a lot of the
Mm,
people are on my list, I've got probably some dead emails that occasionally open. It's not the same. But if you're
sure.
early
Sure.
on,
Yeah.
don't listen to the numbers when you're early on. Like just go, like your power when you're early is in you don't have to be distant because you have so
Mm-hmm.
many more people, like so much more space to be able to get closer to people. Do it. Like send individualized responses when people join your list. There's like a tool you can use to make like a little video response to say, hey, welcome, love to
Yeah.
know where
That's
you're at.
great.
Like I would do that rather than focus on big numbers at first and just go connection, know what you're selling, make the offer consistently. But yeah, it's so much
That's a
simpler than
beautiful word.
people think.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good to hear. You wanted, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but you mentioned you really are interested in the like being creative with how you run your business. Can you say a few more words about this?
Phil, this is one of my
Yes.
biggest things. Like you get this,
Okay.
like your work, your like as a photographer, I would
Mm-hmm.
say your work is in some way creative, right? Like you do
Of
creative
course.
work. Of course, in some way, it's very creative. You do creative work. And I know whether or not we think our work is creative in our business, it's very common, and I used to do this, to focus just on is my work creative, not is how I run my business creative and is how I
Mm-hmm.
structure my life creative. And so I always love to encourage myself and my clients to bring back some play into that. So to say we might bring creativity to our work, but do we bring it to how we do our work and how we make our businesses work? So one way to bring creativity that I love to do to how I make my business work is to set myself challenges. So if I'm feeling like I need a little bit of a creativity boost, I will set myself, say, an income challenge. So I'll say,
Hmm.
I did one not long ago that was like 10K in a fun way. I was like, over and above everything I'm doing, what if I had to bring in 10K in a fun way? What would that look like? Can break all the rules. And I did that. Another
Oh my
one
gosh. I'm
was
smiling so big right now. I love
so
this.
fun, right? And then I was like,
Yeah.
okay, so it can't just be a rerun. It can't be this, and it can't be something that's going to take forever. It had to be in a fun way by the end of this week. Done. Another one was I did
Wow.
100K in a
Yeah.
fun way challenge over and above what I already had planned. So I actually have run that over the course of a year and said, what would it look like to bring
Cool.
100K in a fun way over and above? That was different. It was more established, so I could do that. I did it with smaller
Yes.
amounts earlier. And sometimes I do it not money related. Sometimes I'll do, I want to bring in creativity and I've had this little idea for this thing that could be fun. What would it look like to run a series on this? So I just say, bring in a little
Mm.
creativity with that. And the other way I bring in creativity into my work is to make sure it's fitting how I work at my best. So that might be thinking creatively when I feel a bit of a block around something. So, for example, as you know, Phil, I'm putting together an audio
Mm-hmm.
series. It's going to be called Secret Superpowers, but it's basically, we're going to be released
Yes.
as a podcast, but I'm calling it an audio series because it's
Okay.
heavily
I
produced.
accept that.
And it's a little, you'll see it, you'll get it. And so,
Good.
bringing creativity to that was number one. I knew I wanted to do something audio, podcasty, and I wanted it to feel a little different to the stuff I was thinking of before. And so I looked at how do I do that differently in terms of format. That's making your work creative. But how do I pull it off in a way that's creative? Well, I realized that I kept putting that project on the back burner. So I just thought, okay, this isn't going to happen by itself. Every time I put in the calendar, it
Mm-hmm.
moves. It's the last thing. And so I said, how
Yep.
do I
Yep.
get creative, right? How do I get creative with this problem? And I was chatting to an old client of mine who right now helps people make their projects happen. And we were just chatting, and she used to, I think, be a theater producer. As we were talking about this, she was really helpful. And I was just like, oh my gosh, my creative solution is bring on board like a partner slash coach, like not to speak on the
Mm.
podcast, but to be my sidekick. while I do it. Not quite a
Yep.
producer, not quite a coach, but a bit of everything. No one was offering that. Like, let me be your sidekick. And I was like, I have an offer for you. And I basically pitched her. I was like, I want to hire you for this role that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And she was like,
That's
oh
so
my God.
great.
Like, so she's literally co-creating this pilot with me. We were just talking before I got on here. And that to me was a creative solution because no one was offering that. And there's no playbook
Cool.
that says that. So does that help as an
Yeah,
example?
I love that so much. It's so funny. I actually know somebody who I met her through Clubhouse, and her title was she's a bridesmaid for hire, basically. And she doesn't go to the wedding, but she basically becomes a bride's best friend leading up to the wedding. And she tells her like all the things that needs to happen. She kind of coaches her, does therapy, like tells her this is what's expected, this is what you can like expect to spend on photographers, blah blah blah. And she becomes this like coach slash friend leading up to the wedding. I thought it was so interesting, but it's very similar to what you're describing.
I
Is that
love that
interesting?
one. That's such a good
Yeah. And
solution.
it's such like an essential thing. It's like the bride doesn't necessarily want to hire a wedding planner. You know, she's kind of trying to do it herself, but and her own bridesmaids aren't going to be like as helpful or neutral, but then they have this like voice of wisdom in her ear throughout the process, which is just kind of lovely. And it sounds
That's lovely.
like
I've got this one.
yeah, and it sounds like you created that for yourself. And has it been a good
Exactly.
decision?
Oh my gosh, she's just amazing. This thing has been on
Yeah.
the back burner for like over a year and it's now like actually moving. And I think
That is
that's
the
like,
best gift you could have given yourself. Yeah.
I know. And she's loving it. She's like, I can't believe I get to do this. I'm like, you do. So
Ah.
this is like, I feel like this almost comes a little full circle because, one of the things we talked about earlier was around like using your superpowers and how
Uh-huh.
that's a way of like getting realistic with who you are. That's when we get the best results with the most ease. And I think that to me is linked with finding creative ways to allow yourself to be at your best. Because those answers are often not like handed to us, right? So it's more like when I'm feeling this sense of tightness, of things feeling
Mhm.
sticky, and we all have those different feelings. When I'm feeling that, and that may be a bit of frustration about like, I should be able to be doing this other thing by now. Then one of the things I ask
Yeah.
myself is one is, what if this was easy? And the other one is, how am I letting myself be creative around this solution? Um,
Ah, you're so good,
yeah.
Marianne. I've been doing
Well,
this too. I'm literally having the same conversation in my own life. And like I've built in accountability partners that I check in with daily and stuff. You know, there's like things like this. I totally agree. Um,
yes.
and I interviewed just for our audience, if they haven't listened, I interviewed Jeremy Redleaf, who is the
Leaf,
founder of Cave
yeah.
Day. And Cave Day is also a really wonderful way to work on those big projects. I've built websites. I built my entire coaching website in one Cave Day afternoon
Yes.
because there was like things that I've been wanting to do, but like you said, I keep deprioritizing them or kind of let like my day-to-day business stuff take over. And having that space to like force yourself, no phone, no emails, no notifications, to just work on a big
Yeah.
project is beautiful. And you got your own like Cave Day sidekick, which is great. Um,
You made
but
me
I
think
love
maybe
this
we need to
idea.
do both. We might need to like
Yeah.
cave away, just the two of us.
You and her could
Yeah.
go into a Cave Day session together easily. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to one of the more interesting books I read in the last couple of years, which was Willpower Doesn't Work. And the whole premise of the book is like we have a limited amount, a supply of willpower, and then it runs out like a well, maybe. And so the truest way to change things in our lives is to change something outside of us. And I think that you are describing exactly that, like making it creative, like putting your workout shoes and your gym clothes next to the bed, when you wake
Yeah.
up in the morning, or hiring that person to go alongside of you and like truly changing something in your environment so that the thing gets to be born. I
And
love
I
it.
think by the way, I did not know that book existed, but I've said that to
Oh
clients
yeah.
for years. Willpower doesn't work. But
Oh,
I think, yeah, it's so funny. I was like, I want to
it's
read it
so
now. I'm going to
good.
buy it
You'll
immediately.
really like it. Yeah.
And just a thought on that, something I extend on it is, I'm obsessed with like tailoring things to each person. And I think one thing just to be really aware of is when you're looking at what changes are you making to your environment, just to look at what you know about your personality based on profiles and patterns and what,
Exactly.
that stuff. Like for
Exactly.
me, for
Yep.
example, like have you done Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies? Have you done that, Phil?
Yes, I have. I'm
Did you
going to
come
look
up
it
with
up right
like
now, but
you're a upholder or a obliger or one of those? Is that right?
I will
I know
tell
that you.
you right now, but you tell me a little bit more about that. I'm going to
Yeah,
look it
so
up.
this is one of many different tools I use. And it's basically a very simple free system. You can Google 4 tendencies to understand what your tendency is towards. I think it's towards expectations or getting things done. And so I am someone who get things done when I understand the why of it. And I respond
Yeah.
badly to accountability. so,
Ah,
so really interestingly,
I'm an
it goes the other.
obliger. I just looked it
Oh,
up. I'm an
you're
obliger.
the opposite of
Yeah.
me. So I'm a questioner, and an obliger
Yeah.
actually needs accountability to get things done. Very much
Yeah.
struggles without it. So
Exactly.
my fiance is an obliger, so Michael's same as you. And so when you know that, but then
Yeah.
I layer on top. I use a lot of profile systems. I'm an ENFP profile in Myers-Briggs or the Keirsey system, and we
Mm-hmm.
only get stuff done well in collaboration. So when I layer those two
Hmm.
things together, I know that I need to know the why. As a questioner, I need to know the why. And as an ENFP, if I am stuck, I always have to ask who, not what. So who is on this with me? I can't work by myself. Like I do work by myself in the sense of like I'm a solo person. I have a lot
Yeah.
of alone time out of choice, but I need to know there's a partner on a project, be it an advanced assistant or manager or a colleague who's a coach, or in this case, someone I've hired in. So like I just encourage everyone to like get to know yourself and get real with it.
Yes.
Rather than beating ourselves up and saying, oh, I just don't get stuff done. It's like, well, maybe your conditions aren't right.
Yeah.
And so
I love that.
important.
I always tell people it's funny. I have my own version of this. I think some people are really motivated by rewards and some are motivated by punishments. And I'm definitely a
Ooh.
punishments person. So I will if I stay up past midnight, the next day I lose all TikTok and Instagram privileges.
What?
And it forces me to shut down. I will literally I'll be furiously scrolling TikTok until 11:59 p.m. And then I'm like, I got it. And I put my phone down so I can wake up the next morning and have my stuff. But I hate the
Oh,
punish. I'm motivated by that. It's really funny. But I agree. You definitely need
so
to know yourself to
useful.
know how you can, how to make changes. I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna end it. I could talk to you for hours, Marianne, but I want to make this palatable to our listeners. So, is there any final words of wisdom you'd like to share, or I don't know, a book you'd like to recommend, or anything that you'd like to say before we bid adieu?
I think that a big part of creating your own epic freelance life is to make sure that it's actually your epic freelance life and not someone else's. So
Yes,
one question
yes,
I'd leave
yes.
everyone with is the question I ask every single client of mine, which is what game are you playing? So this month, what
Mm.
game are you playing? This year, what game are you playing? How do you want to feel? What's the thing you most want to have? And just keep that question with you. What game am I playing whenever you're in that world of like, should I focus here or here? And just come back to that question. And that is where we get the best answers from.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marianne. Stay on. We'll chat a little bit after, but I love you. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you, Phil.